Welcome back to Good Revenue. We're here today with Jazz Samra. She's the head of innovation and strategic partnerships at Wells Fargo, and she drives collaboration with tech companies and venture capital firms. Jazz has also been at Google and Nest, as well as other tech companies and startups, and she's a passionate champion of women in tech. Welcome, Jazz. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Neeta. It's so good to be here.
It's a pleasure. I know we have talked about this for a long time, and I'm really excited to get into all the things innovation.
Yeah, and congratulations on your success. It's been great to watch you just soar. And I remember being there for that first episode. It's amazing to see you a year later.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we will dive right in. You are a leader in innovation at Wells Fargo. What are the global trends that you see shaping financial services today? Are there any opportunities in the sector that you think innovation is particularly well suited for?
I think there's a lot of interesting things that we're following. So when you think about collaborative families or the sandwich generation, their banking needs are changing, right? So there's something like $25 billion in that space. How do we really think about the disruption and the opportunity to look at collective banking? Something else that's interesting is the generational wealth. There's going to be $84 trillion in the next 20 years passed down from generations. And so the type of assets that people have, the way that they collect money, the way that they follow their money. You think about the baby boomers retiring and leaving their businesses to the next generation. Those are really interesting trends that we're thinking about. We're also thinking about our customers and the channels. So where do you want to be? How are customers of the future wanting to be serviced? And is it a blend of different channels and experiences? There's something also around the relationship manager, the role of the financial advisor, the planner, and how that ebbs and flows across different segments and the next generation to be served financially. Obviously, generative AI, a trend that everyone's closely watching and really thinking about how that shows up in our products and services and for our customers. I also think about financial literacy in the country. So when you look at the youth, when you think about sound financial literacy, that number is only at 24%. So what can we do in that space to really help people become astute about their finances and their financial future?
That is such an interesting problem set. It's really interesting to hear what a wide range of topics you're exploring. How do you approach innovation in an organization as large as Wells Fargo and one with a really long history?
Yeah. So you and I have debated a lot around innovators' dilemma and Clay Christensen's model. I really think it's about creating the culture and the conditions for innovation. From the top, we have this culture, right, around how do we want to think about the new products and services and where our customers' needs are. And so we are looking at 5 principles around innovation, and we want to bring in our partnerships into that ecosystem. So first, we really want to be attached to the strategic plan in the direction that we're headed as an organization. What's important to us, and how do we really think about problem statements or opportunity areas connected to the strategic plan? Secondly, we want to think about sponsorship, right? So it's a large organization. Everyone has their own strategies, their go-to-markets, their products, et cetera, and their responsibilities to the organization. So who's going to really champion, right, the work and really get behind it? And they're senior enough that they're going to see it through. I think the third thing, which is something that's new in the Valley, hot right now from Y Combinator, is founder-led, right? So obviously you want to have a combination of being a manager, but founder. But this idea of being really obsessed with the problem statement, the area, the technology, and really being that person in conjunction with the sponsor to take that to the next level. That's something that we're looking at. And you mentioned the history of Wells Fargo. We've been around for over 150 years, and we have this deep-rooted culture of innovation. And that has also been tied to single people or groups of people really getting excited and passionate about something and driving change. And so we're really continuing to, tap into that DNA. The fourth area is that it's customer focused or product led, right? And so there's a lot of innovation that can happen within the company, but how do we really think about what is external facing and how do we solve our new or next problems for our customers? And then lastly, that is commercially viable. I wrote an article around the green box of innovation, right? So yes, you want a lot of ideas, you want a lot of creativity, yet you do want to ring fence around a time frame as well as commercial viability. So those are some of the areas that we're focused on and at least creating the condition for innovation.
Thanks for taking us through that framework. Given those principles, do you believe that innovation is best centralized, or do you think that it should be distributed across business units and cultivated in the business?
That's a great question. I think you oscillate between centralized and decentralized. I think the approach that we have here is really that everyone owns innovation, right? We all have a unique way to do our jobs, and we want to look beyond our jobs and we want to innovate, just same way as strategy. What we want to do, as I mentioned, is really create the environment and the conditions as we're looking at the next set of products for the organization to be able to test, learn, prototype, iterate in that Eric Ries style of being able to drive value. So we imagine that everyone's innovating in their own jobs, especially in the tech organization and as we are building for our customers. However, in this environment, what are the special tools and conditions that we can create to help you unlock innovation?
You are focused on what you call the middle of innovation. Can you tell us what that is and what it entails?
Yeah, so I was inspired by a Harvard Business Review article called The Middle Path to Innovation. The thesis here is that there are companies that are large enterprises that are building their path. They have products and services that are connected or close to their core offering, or they're buying and bringing that technology in. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. So this idea of this middle path is as you're thinking about the build, buy, borrow, there's another model called co-create. We'll have to think of a B. Someone on the team said bond. How do you think about actually listing your challenges or your areas of opportunity and bringing a company or an emerging tech founder or cohort together to get the best of both? So you get all the principles still apply. You get the founder mentality, you get the resources of the organization, yet you get someone that's nimble and maybe from the market and has the flexibility. I'm sitting here in the innovation center where we're trying to create this culture and really be able to bring in companies to test and iterate and drive proof of concepts with.
My vote is the word blend.
So that's a great one.
So you also mentioned in the 5 principles that transformation is top of mind. And obviously that makes a lot of sense. We know that Wells Fargo has been going through a big period of change over the last several years. How do innovation initiatives align with that overall?
So we sit in a centralized function called strategy and digital innovation. And the advantage is that we get to work firm-wide or enterprise-wide. I always encourage the team to think about that horizontal view in a world of verticals. How do you think about connecting the dots across the organization? And I mentioned the first principle is that what we want to do is actually connect it to the corporate strategy. So we want to really understand firm-wide what our focus areas are, and then really start to carve out a problem statement or an area that we can really get obsessed with and really think about how we can drive disruption, right? So going back to Clay Christensen's like incrementality versus disruption. So our team's really thinking a little bit ahead, and how do we think about those disruptive models that we can really, in a time frame that makes sense for us, capture a market or a customer. So again, it's focused on the strategy, and it's customer led, and then it's using our sort of capabilities to be able to take advantage.
That's a perfect segue, because I was also curious to know if there were other strategies or frameworks that you're finding helpful. You're a couple years into this role, and any large organization goes through a lot of change. Are there other frameworks that maybe have been helpful, or are there challenges that you've worked through, and so they're giving you a better sense of how to distribute innovation?
So we use the desirability, viability, feasibility model, which a lot of innovators do. And so we want to be able to test and learn and be able to bring in learnings as fast as we can and then iterate and continue to go. Simply, I like to say, let's be scrappy. Let's start small, but let's really think big. So be expansive in our thinking, but really think about how we can scale. So those are some frameworks that we're able to leverage.
I know that you are a champion for leveraging human-centered design principles and prototyping, which I also find to be super interesting. Can you take us through what that process looks like and what excites you about some of those techniques?
A lot of what we're doing is we're just being really clear on what's first, what's next, and then what are we doing, right? So really thinking about a problem that's well-defined is half solved, right? So we spend a lot of time at the top of the funnel in the BD of it, right? What are you really trying to solve? What do you really think the challenge is? What are the customer opportunities? And how can we really unpack that? We're trying to get to a minimum viable product or prototype, right? And so we want to go through the process of market scans, looking at quantitative, qualitative data, ethnographic data, And there's a scan of what our competitors are doing, but also emerging technology. What are we seeing in the market? Where's some of that VC money going? What are some of those theses? And then we want to use sort of behavioral based science and approach to be able to think about the customer and where their needs are, and then move to product market fit, right? So what is the path to think about, do we have a role to play here? And then what's the minimum viable product, as I mentioned, and then going back to iterate, right? So getting as far as we can. So Astro Teller talks a lot about taking a lot of ideas and just seeing how far you can take them. And what is the most scrappy way that we can take it to that next level? Your recent host, Jay Lee, you talked about that in prototyping and labbing, is you don't have to think about building everything at first. Like you can just start with a few ideas and get them in front of a customer and then just get some reaction to see if you can take it that next step. And so we spend a lot of time thinking in that capacity, but being nimble and flexible and just being able to take an idea as far as we can before we really hit a wall.
Yeah, I love that. I was just going to say that was one of my favorite episodes that we've done so far because it is so engaging. And I feel like what's so interesting about it, particularly for, again, a more established organization, you have a reputation, you have a brand, a company to manage, is that prototyping feels like such an interesting way to actually solve those problems and have meaningful results, right? It's both liberating and it seems like that process has some surety to it as well. So anyway, I love that you brought that up. Yeah, I think it's super interesting. One of the other things that can be challenging for companies that are trying to innovate is if you're a firm that's in a regulated market. And that's for good reason, because as a consumer, as a member of the public, we want to have companies treating customers well. But I am curious, since you're in financial services, how do you balance that desire to have innovation take root as quickly as possible with some of the constraints and the slower timelines that a regulatory environment can bring?
Yeah, I think it's responsible innovation, right? And so we all have a risk and regulatory mindset and a customer first mindset. And so within that, those are again, part of the conditions that I talked about. And so I think you want to think about scrappy innovation as well as what are all the new products and services that you want to launch. And in the center here, we have examples throughout the whole center of our innovation. There's something simple as a banker, one of our first branches in Chinatown, and a banker Lehman saying, hey, people are walking by, but they can't really read Wells Fargo. So how do we just translate this to Cantonese and then we can really connect to our customer? And so really making sure that you're creating those conditions and that you are testing and learning and being able to take an idea to that next level. And so I think here we want to create the space, right? We want to create an environment where you can feel creative. You want to bring a lot of people together and be collaborative. And you just want to have a space to be able to stretch the thinking a little bit further and then just see how far you go. And that's the beauty of innovation, right? You can go far in the aperture and then you can bring it back to make sure that you're meeting the market and the conditions that you have.
You mentioned the MVP and prototyping process, and I really share your enthusiasm for it. I'm curious, when you, as an organization, this is probably beyond the scope of just what your team is doing, what does it look like to actually operationalize and implement some of this innovation?
That's a really good question. We're really focused also on not just idea generation, but that green box. It's got to be commercially viable. So we're hoping that if up the front, we set the conditions for innovation, which again, sponsor and founder mindset, that founding team, which will include our team in terms of innovation, strategic partnership alignment, but they're the founder of the idea. And that's the concept, that they're in the business and they can sort of own the decision to launch the product. I had a chance to meet with FD Wilder, who was at P&G for 40 years and led innovation and strategy. And he really talked about that. You have to have someone coming in that's really going to disrupt that space, but it becomes part of their core job. And then they take it back to their organization because they own that decision. They're the decision maker, and then they can launch that new innovative product or service.
This is super interesting. And I'm also curious to know, what are some of the key metrics that you use as an organization to actually measure innovation in a corporate environment?
This is a really interesting question, a question I get asked a lot. And so KPIs, of course, we want to think about how we're measuring success. And so when we think about the team, we want to really think about, number one, education, right? So how do we think about being agile, human-centered design, but also emerging technologies that are in the marketplace? How do we really federate that across the organization? So we spend a lot of time thinking about that. Testing and learning, right? We're in this environment where everyone's driving their business. You have to stop as a senior leader and take some bets. And so we become this environment, a safe space where you can try some things out and quickly iterate and get some learnings. And to that point, the third point I would make is that a lot of what we're doing is influencing, right? It could be providing some knowledge or insights or research that's going to influence a product decision or even verify a decision that they already have. And so that becomes really important for us. We want to be measuring prototypes, proof of concepts, and basically creating that flywheel. Like we're really looking at what we're learning from other projects, as well as the insights that we're driving, and we're feeding that into the new thinking that we have as we approach a new problem.
I appreciate hearing that because it really seems like these metrics have to be different than in a startup, right? Because of course you're a commercial organization, you want commercial outputs, but in your case, it really seems like you're also trying to build this muscle for innovation, creating a space where people can actually have these ideas and then test them in a way that is safe for your organization, for your customers. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I think it's about the model, right? And so
Sure.
again, after a while, they're talked about, you need to have 100 ideas, like you need to have a big pipeline and then have the people, like get the ones to the top that people are obsessed about and then go deep in there. What I've been actually focusing on is a handful of discovery areas, right? What are the most important areas that we really think that we can be disruptive? And how do we get really focused on that and get the right founding team to come together to solve some of those challenges? It's interesting. The top 100 companies or innovative companies by Fast Company, it was a really interesting list. Of course, there's the NVIDIAs and OpenAIs, but Taco Bell is on that list, right? Number 8. And so they all talk about focus, right? When you look at the top 100 innovative companies as per Fast Company, they're really interesting. And of course, you have the OpenAIs and NVIDIAs. However, you have companies like Taco Bell on that list as well in the top 10. And they're really getting focused on tacos are a mindset. Like what a great concept. YouTube is on that list, right? Is disrupting or reinventing the living room or owning the living room. That's a really powerful space. Or women's sports, right? The National Women's Soccer League really being able to capitalize on the slogan that everyone watches women's sports. And so being really laser focused on a handful of opportunities versus do you want to try a lot? And I think the spirit of testing and iterating prototyping occurs in both models. Yet I think you as an organization want to say, are you looking at focus on a handful of opportunities? Or are you really trying several hundreds of ideas?
Tacos as a mindset should be their next campaign. I think that's amazing.
I need that on a t-shirt.
I love it. I love it. And what I'm hearing in that too is actually two things. You're talking about focusing on opportunities and having some precision there. But I think you're also saying that one of the things I thought was so interesting about how Jay Lee approaches prototyping was people get so hung up on that starting point for asking the question, is this a good question or a bad question, the kind of value judgments. And what I thought was fascinating was she was really talking about how you really need to just get started and work through this. But to your point, having some area of focus, and you don't need to necessarily build hot air balloons at Wells Fargo. I think there's something in that too, right? Where to have narrow focus and where to be more expansive in your thinking.
Yeah, she talked a lot about what a great podcast. I have to meet her. Like,
I know she's amazing. We'll send her this episode afterwards.
The shape of the problem looks the same across and just starting. So once you have enough that you understand the problem area, just starting to test and iterate and take it a little bit further. And then she talked about Uber for dogs, just realizing with some early data points that might not be the right path to take. You don't need to go build a whole app and a whole customer journey to be able to do that, but just getting something in front of some customers to see their reactions and thinking about how you can pivot. I think that's really the path, or those are the conditions we want to create within the company.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. One last question on this topic, and then we'll switch gears and talk a little more about startups. Financial services is a huge market, and there's a lot of opportunity. How do you view the dynamic when it comes to fintechs and innovation external to the bank, as well as what you and your colleagues are working on internally?
Yes, innovation, right, as we're talking about, has to go beyond our walls, right? And so we think that by partnering, we can leverage the best of both, right? So as a large organization with a massive customer base, we're really able to look at our data, we can scale products, and we can really understand that behavior. And so we have, again, this rich data set where some fintechs can add value, right? They can look at the value chain and they can go really deep in a problem statement or an area, and then they can leverage our data. So we think it's a symbiotic relationship, and it's key to the ecosystem. Fintechs can also be more nimble. They move faster, and they also provide us sort of real-time data around customers as well. And so we think that we coexist, and we definitely want to continue to look at partnerships.
One of the reasons that I think you're such a huge asset to Wells Fargo in this innovation role is that you have this background in tech and in startups. You're really passionate about women in tech and about creating more opportunities for inclusivity and diversity. And I love that. And I admire your passion. At the same time, it's a challenging environment. Somehow DEI has gotten a bad rap lately. And we're having really interesting conversations in this country about what some of those words mean. What's your take on this? And tell us a little bit about the work that you have done.
Yes, I was recently on a panel in New York at Innovate, and we talked really about the difference between sponsorship, allyship, and mentorship. And so I encourage people, regardless of their walk of life or their space, to think about those differences. A sponsor is someone who is in a room that you're not in and really advocating for your work. An ally is really supporting your cause and can be a voice to the cause that you have. And a mentor can be more tactical around an area that you want to focus on. And so what I think is really important is being purpose driven. And so we can all play a role. And even if we're in a room with 50 women or hundreds of women or people of color, what are we doing to look behind us and really think about how do we leave the space better than what we found? And so I talk a lot about that. What is the role that we all play? We all play a role in culture. How can we bring everyone along? How can you be a sponsor? How can you be an ally? And how can you be a mentor? But then also, if you're on the other end of that, being really critical with what you're trying to achieve. Don't assume that you have sponsors. Talk to people. It's probably a lot easier than you think. And you'll get an answer quickly, right? So you'll understand around who's in that room. And if you don't have that person, then ask for it. Say, what would it take? What would I need to show you? Or where can I work on to get there? And I think that slowly we're seeing change in the industry.
We've talked a lot today about innovation. You also have brought it full circle to the importance of commercialization. It's obviously a really tough time right now for startups. And so I wonder, given that you've been on both sides of the coin, what do you think startups could be doing differently to give some of the businesses they built more legs, more chances either to grow, scale, or even get acquired?
Great question. We've talked a little bit about that middle path. I would say be creative, right? And so there's the build. I'm building technology and I want to sell it to these enterprises. And then you use the enterprise to give feedback. There's a feedback loop to help you with your product roadmap. I think being creative means like, how can you potentially blend with the company, right? Like, how do you think about a handful of companies across industry potentially that have this same type of dynamics? And how can you really solve some of those challenges? That's a really interesting model. The second thing I would say is like following the customer lifecycle. So there's this fine balance of you have a value proposition, you have a tech company, and you need to just really prove that value and you need to be founder minded, right? Really obsessed with that. But as you're doing that, what is on your roadmap? As you look in that chain, either the value chain or the customer journey, do you think there's a space earlier than when you're positioned or later? And how do you slide down that value chain while also delivering your value? I think is super interesting. I'm really excited about the first part, right? Like, how do we really think about those models and what are the new disruptive ways that you can work together? I meet VCs all the time. I meet companies that are blends of VCs and consultants. I meet companies that are blends of VC and innovation companies that are trying to help enterprises. And there's something about that creation. There's creating together, investing, having skin in the game, and then also buying, right? And so as we think about those models, how do we disrupt those models in themselves? And what role can emerging tech companies play in that value chain?
One of the things I really like about your career is that you've been super successful in a range of different roles and also different types and stages of companies. You've been a founder as well. Is there one skill in particular that has been helpful in navigating all of that?
So I think just being passionate about what you do, being really curious about the customer and how you're adding value, and being flexible. And so there are companies that could use your skill set that are large or small or within your domain or not. I had an opportunity to work in the ads business, in the financial services business, and in the hardware business. And so you just get to see different and more complex problem sets and really bring that experience to life.
Drawing from all of your experience, what's the hardest thing that you've had to do professionally? And what were some of the lessons that you learned from that experience?
Yeah. So I think the hardest thing I've had to do is ask for more, right? One of the ways that I look at growth and development is putting yourself outside of the business. And so something that's been tricky and hard is actually thinking about the problem statement or the vision of the company from a different angle outside of yourself And then thinking about these are some of the options, if you were looking at that as a problem statement or a consultant. And then you also, the hardest part is like putting your hand up for one of those, right? And so I've done that more recently in my career, really looking outside from an outside in perspective, saying, okay, if I'm trying to solve this from your perspective and it may be a senior leader, here are some things that I might think about. Here's some things that I've learned. And here are the three options, right? That 1-3-1, this is a problem that I see. These are three options that I think about. And then this is one that I think is really interesting. And once you get through that framework, then you put your hand up and say, hey, I'm willing to take that challenge. Because sometimes leaders don't know if you're at capacity or what you're interested in. If you think, hey, I can learn something here and I can also give a skill set here, that's a really interesting way to add to your career. But that's been tricky to navigate. And then I would also say creating the conditions myself, right? Who are the sponsors around me that I can think about championing my work, but who are the mentors that I can really learn from? And I try to be really mindful of their time, but also being really specific with what I'm trying to learn. And so that the magic in that is that there could be mentors that are around you within your company. There's mentors that are your friends and colleagues that you meet in the industry. And then you want to think about people in other industries and how they solve problems. And so really creating that environment around you to boost you up as a support network. It's almost like your board of directors to help you think differently and challenge you is what I've been focused on.
I love that. What is something that everyone else takes for granted that you think is inaccurate?
Roger Federer played over 1,500 matches in his career. He won 80% of the games, but only 54% of the points. And so you over time are headed in that right direction, but take risk, right? Tennis is so interesting because it's about that next strategy. You may have lost that point, but you have to move on quick, right? So you have to think about the next strategy, being curious, thinking about testing and iterating. And to your point earlier, you might not have the whole analysis of what you want to do, but really a well-defined problem will help you with the solution and really driving for that testing and learning mindset.
I love that. Jazz, this has been such a great and wide-ranging conversation. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before our last question?
We're in a very interesting time where technology is moving really fast and you're seeing all of this wild adoption, but it still takes decades and time for adoption, right? A McKinsey study recently just talked to companies, enterprises, and only 22% of enterprises feel that they're fully cloud and capabilities enabled, right? And innovation and disruption takes time. So I think be curious, really have an open mindset, and then test and learn.
That's a great segue into our last question. Based on your experience, what do you think that high performance organizations do differently from average performers?
Jim Collins' Good to Great, which is a study around why companies were average and who outperformed. And so they really looked at the stock indicators and then dug deeply. And so it goes back to some of the foundings of Phil Knight in Nike. People that have really good cultures at the top really make a difference. Right? So who are your founding members? Who are the people that are really driving the company or the idea forward? Second, it's about the institutional knowledge, right? There's something there about people who have been in the organization. They've served the fries, they've delivered the mail, and they're going through the organization or they've seen different models coming in. And they can really capitalize on that. And I think the third is the culture, right? You have a culture of being disruptive versus being incrementalist. And the organization really makes a difference. And we see that time and time again. When you even think of the D&I reports, I think there's a lot around the diversity, the diverse thinking and the diverse experience and bringing those people together to really perform better.
This is so wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated having you.
It was a total blast. It's so good to see you. And congratulations again on your wild success. It's been amazing to see you grow, seeing all of these podcasts and you being able to really sit down with some amazing leaders. So it's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much.
No, you're doing me the honor and joining us. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show, give us a rating, or leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us, and we really appreciate your support. You can also catch full videos and highlights on our YouTube channel.